Hi, the purpose of this video is to provide an overview of the Myth Builders learning module, which can be used to support students learning about Greek mythology in Minecraft. And if you're a teacher and you want to access this learning module, and you're watching this video on YouTube, I've put a link to this site where you can access this document. So when you get to the site, go to the learning modules section and scroll down a bit, and you'll find a link to the learning module here. So Myth Builders takes a constructionist approach to learning, whereby students are provided with a general overarching problem, i.e. students have to use Minecraft to create a digital text about mythology. So this requires students to develop their knowledge and understanding of mythology through constructing this knowledge and understanding via the making of artifacts in Minecraft's virtual environment. As students go about the creation of a myth or aspects of myth, they have to decide how they'll represent these aspects in Minecraft. So this effectively requires students to solve a number of causally linked mini problems in order to solve the overarching or big problem of creating a digital text based on a myth. What I liked about using this type of pedagogy with Minecraft was that it affords students a great degree of control over the learning process and requires them to take ownership of their learning. So students make a number of choices about what and how they'll represent their myth in Minecraft and engage in a range of desirable learning related activities like researching, collaborating, designing, and building. I found this task was great for getting students to work closely with primary source evidence from the ancient Greek or Roman context, like ancient texts and translation. I also like this task because I see students being creative, committed, and highly immersed in what they're doing. So students engage in iterative practices where they would have to design, test, and retest the artifacts that they built to debug them and make sure they work properly for when somebody else used or played their digital text. So there's a range of beneficial learning outcomes that can happen when using this type of pedagogy to learn about Greek myth using Minecraft. Regarding timing, I gave my students 3 weeks of class time, so that's 12 one-hour lessons. If students have internet access at home, they can work on this activity with their peers outside of class time if they want. My students had been learning about Greek mythology for a couple of weeks in class prior to this activity, and the class had a mixture of students who were new to Minecraft or experienced with playing Minecraft. And we did spend a couple of lessons, 2 lessons, prior to this module learning how to play Minecraft through the game's inbuilt tutorial world. I found that this was enough to help new players develop the base gameplay skill set that they'd need to participate in this activity and finish it within the time frame. But of course you can adjust this time frame, and you might like to run it over a term where maybe you spend like 1 lesson a week on it, and the timing is something that you'll get a better feel for once you have run the activity a couple of times. I gave students the option to work individually or in groups of 2 or 3 to complete this activity. These options all worked fine, and I do recommend letting students choose whether or not to work independently or in small groups. The only thing I suggest monitoring is where you have group situations that are comprised of experienced and non-experienced Minecraft players, as this tends to result in frustration as the non-experienced players get in the way of the experienced players when building in Minecraft. So encouraging students to work independently or in small groups of 2 or 3 that have similar gameplay ability is what I found worked best, but obviously you might like to go about this differently. Scrolling down the page now, here we have some links to the New Zealand curriculum. So I've aligned the module to the different aspects of the curriculum, but feel free to adapt these. Generally, this section here is for teachers and is a way to provide some quality assurance in that the module is meeting the intentions of the New Zealand curriculum. I found that some people are a bit skeptical about bringing a video game into the classroom environment. So aside from using a well-informed pedagogical approach like problem-based learning, showing how the module links to the curriculum helps validate the use of Minecraft to support learning. Students are typically not interested in this type of information, and you could simplify this section when presenting these instructions to students by just explaining in a couple of bullet points what the intended learning objectives are, so students know why they're doing the activity. We use this activity in preparation for a classical studies internal standard, where students required an understanding about the significance of myth in ancient Greek society. So we use this activity in preparation for that. Finally, with the need to implement a digital curriculum looming on the horizon, I use the MediaSmart Digital Fluency Framework to align this module with relevant ICT-related competencies. The reason I used this framework was because it is endorsed by UNESCO and was developed for schools and teachers to use, albeit Canadian schools. You can find this framework online by Googling MediaSmart, that's one word, digital literacy. So MediaSmart digital literacy. Obviously, digital fluency is massive and everybody is in the process of figuring out what this looks like in their context. So you might like to use a different framework or approach to digital fluency here to suit your students. Okay, so let's move to the overview now. So I just read the section through with my students to provide them some context and outline some expectations. So let's just go through it and I'll explain my thinking behind the overview. So storytelling is a phenomenon that has defined human cultures and identities throughout time. The stories we tell are imbued with messages about what we value as people and what we don't. The ancient Greeks used mythology to provide parameters for how to be human and establish social norms as a means of explaining unexplainable natural events, as a way of bringing their gods to life and cultivating heroic role models, and as a medium for projecting and exploring the more radical ideas embedded in the collective human psyche. This task requires you to produce a specific product, i.e., a digital text based on Greek mythology, but the process and format in which you fulfill the task can take many forms. While these instructions can serve you like a step-by-step process to meet the task requirement, these are guidelines only. There are many ways to go about the creative process in designing your digital story, and the steps provided do not necessarily have to be carried out in a strict order. For instance, you may find yourself going back and forward between researching, designing, and building your representation of the myth in Minecraft, to add things in, delete things you no longer like, or check that you've got the right myth details. An ancient Greek called Heraclitus once said, "Everything flows, nothing abides. Everything gives way and nothing stays fixed." Because life is an ever-changing process, it is natural that our creative endeavors reflect this sentiment. So, in this overview, I really emphasize to students that the creative process is messy. And we talk about how the messiness of the creative process. And I do this for two reasons. One is to get away from the rigid, linear approach to inquiry-based learning that I traditionally took to the creative process, where students would follow a strict step-by-step process to create a product or an assignment. So I wanted to get away from that because I've come to believe that regimenting learning in that way stifles creativity and innovation, which is kind of the point of doing this activity. So I want students to be creative and innovative, so discussing how the creative process can be unstructured, iterative, and quite messy is really useful towards encouraging students to adopt personalized ways to go about the creation of their myths. Secondly, I wanted this activity to reflect the way our students are using digital media in their lives outside of school. So we're producing, modifying, and messing around with digital artifacts are part of their everyday lives. Minecraft is a perfect example of a technology that has been developed by its users, who have adapted and shaped and modified it to get it where it is today. So while these instructions can be used as a step-by-step process for students who want that kind of guidance, I encourage a more fluid approach to the creative process to let students know that they can complete the activity in a manner that suits their personal preferences. And taking this approach has worked well so far. And moving on now to the first part of the process, which is about the research components. So students need to choose and research a myth, and also they need to choose and research, or research and then choose a way to represent the myth in Minecraft. So looking first at researching the mythology aspect, this section here explains to students that they can choose a myth we have covered in class, or that they've found of their own accord through personal research. Typically, my classical studies class has covered myth for a couple of weeks prior to this activity, so they've got some basic myths under the belt about creation, the gods, and some of the Greek heroes. It's likely that you'll be in a different situation, so please adjust these instructions accordingly by making a personal copy of this document, and of course you can do this by clicking on File and then make a copy. Greek mythology is obviously a very broad in scope, so I found that students were eager to explore myths we had studied in class in more depth, or they were eager to study myths that appealed to them that they encountered from their own personal research. The key aspect here is that in letting students decide on the subject matter, this means they select a myth that they find personally interesting, which improves their engagement. So once students have chosen a myth, they should ideally carry out some research on that myth. Now, we use the Classical Mythology book by Marian Finley and the website theoi.com. The textbook is certainly not essential. We just have it here at hand on school, so I include it as a matter of convenience, but quality secondary resources can obviously be found online if you don't have access to text, hard copy text. The website theoi.com is quite critical in my opinion because it has an abundance of primary source evidence, and this activity provides such a rich opportunity to have students critically engage with primary source evidence from the ancient context. So theoi.com provides students with ancient literature and translation, images of ancient artifacts like vase paintings and mosaics. So I show students how to do a keyword search in theoi.com to find information about a myth or about a mythical character they're interested in, and really emphasize that while secondary source information is useful towards getting a general understanding of the myth, we really want to be working with these primary sources to help us understand these stories and their significance in the ancient context. So scrolling down, the second research component simply involves students finding a format for their digital text. When I first ran this activity with students, I did not want to impose a particular mode of presentation, so I presented students with a range of options like building an interactive digital story, like a quest or a game where the player learns about myth through following instructions and completing mini tasks in the game world. Other options we looked at were creating a setting from a myth or creating a scene from a myth and then making a video of that scene where students narrated the story through voice recording. Most of my students decided to make quests or adventure maps where players would spawn into the world and have to follow a series of little tasks to complete that would enable the player to learn about the myth and the character the quest was based on. So an example of a quest world is provided in this link here called The Fall of Hephaestus. So you can import this world file to your Minecraft account to show students an example if you like. So while making a quest did end up being the most effective way to complete this task for my students, the reality is that there's multiple ways that they can go about this. The main point for me was getting students to work closely with their myth and the primary source evidence to represent this in a creative way in Minecraft. So I had students who tried to make a mini movie to retell their myth in video format, but they struggled to finish the task in the time frame within 3 weeks, 12 lessons. So while I found making quests was an effective option, there's other modes that you might like to encourage students to explore, so please feel free to adapt this section as required. Okay, so let's scroll down further now and take a look at the design brief section of the module. So we start off with a checklist. This checklist simply provides a list of tasks that students can use if they like to guide their creation of a myth. So this is just for many of the students who want a specific process to follow. Moving down to the what section of the design brief. This outlines what students might need to identify in the myth they choose to recreate. So when they're researching, this is a list of things that I encourage students to make a note of. So things like characters, places, events, the key ideas embedded in the myth, etc. So it's essential for students to identify some of these things from the myth they choose, because this then gives them an understanding for the scope of their task. Once they have this list, they can decide what aspects to keep and what to let go in terms of their adaptation or recreation of the myth in Minecraft. The how section of the design brief asks students to consider the tools and features of Minecraft that they might like to use to communicate aspects of the myth. For example, NPCs or non-playable characters could help provide critical information in the game, or like a quest. They could represent mythical figures. Chests are quite useful to use for storing things. You can use weapons or signs or boards to communicate information. Mobs like animals or water, modes of transportation, or maybe for more advanced players, things like ender pearls or nether portal, or even the use of redstone, which is kind of like getting into the mechanics of Minecraft. So there's many tools and features of the Minecraft environment that can help your students communicate the narrative in an interactive way. The point of the how section is that you want students to think about how they can represent aspects of their chosen myth in the digital environment. So this brings us to the planning paragraph. I usually give students 2 periods to research their myth and then plan how they might represent artifacts of this myth in Minecraft. And at the end of these 2 periods, I ask students to show me a paragraph about what aspects of their myth they're going to include and how they intend to show these aspects in Minecraft. So the 2 key parts of the design brief, the what and the how. This requires students to articulate their thinking and acts as a little design brief or a plan that they can use to get started. It's also important that you discuss with students that this paragraph is not fixed. It's likely that as they try things out in Minecraft, their original plans will need to adapt and change, and that this is a completely normal, natural part of the creative process. So I guess the main reason I get students to write a paragraph about what myth they're doing and how they're going to represent it is to encourage them to engage in the research process meaningfully. They know I'm going to see the paragraph, so this does provide some motivation to do the research well and improves the overall quality of students' digital texts. Additionally, as the teacher, the paragraphs provide me with a key information about what students are doing, so I can provide them some more targeted support in terms of resourcing and assisting them with their creations. So once you've seen the planning paragraphs from students, you can provide them with a bit of feedback and they can get started on building their narratives. So that brings us down to the last section of the module. This section basically tells students to create their digital story and get started with researching and designing. It reminds them that the creative process can be a little chaotic and that this is normal. Additionally, this section encourages students to share their work with others and test it out and get feedback, and then use this feedback to improve their designs. I found that students did this naturally as they built artifacts in the game environment. They'll test it out, find flaws, fix them, and then retest it until they achieve the desired results. Getting feedback on designs is quite an important activity, so you could make this more official than what I've written here. And you can actually have a task where students need to show evidence of obtaining and acting on feedback. That's entirely up to you. Finally, we have a little graphic down the bottom here that outlines some of the components of the creative process to remind students of the things that they might find themselves toing and froing between as they work towards completing the task. So that's it. That's the overview of the modules. Please feel free to take a copy of this and adapt it to suit your students and your context. I've made a separate video of me playing a digital myth that some of my students created in Minecraft called The Fall of Hephaestus, which is in the learning module section of this site if you want to see what students can create from participating in this task. Thank you for watching.